Welcome to Dialogues of Discovery, a platform where we bring you conversations with visionary thinkers and trailblazers who are shaping the future. If you are curious, passionate, or just figuring it all out, you are in the right place.
Each episode brings you insights, experiences, and advice from the lives and minds of remarkable people, scientists, innovators, and creators, so you can get inspired, explore, and start carving your own path forward. Listen on to uncover more.
Joining us today is Professor Mahesh Sankaran, a leading ecologist at the National Centre for Biological Studies, Bengaluru, and a researcher whose work has shaped how we understand ecosystems under a changing climate. Professor Sankaran is the recipient of the 2021 Infosys Prize in Life Sciences for his contributions to understanding the ecology of tropical savannas and grasslands. He is also a fellow of both the Indian Academy of Sciences and the Indian National Science Academy.
Beyond research, he has contributed to major international assessments by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, influencing how science informs global climate and biodiversity policy.
His research explores how climate, fires, vegetative and nutrient cycles interact to influence the structure and stability of ecosystems, particularly in savannas across Africa and the Western Ghats in India. His group investigates how shifts in rainfall, drought, and rising carbon dioxide affect ecosystem resilience and the benefits they provide to people and the planet.
From long-term field experiments to global climate assessments, Professor Sankaran's work reminds us how deeply connected human and ecological futures are. We are excited to dive into his journey, research, and vision in this episode of Dialogues of Discovery.
Professor, you received the 2021 Infosys Prize for your pioneering work on the ecology of tropical savanna ecosystems and for highlighting the biodiversity of important Indian ecosystems like the Western Ghats. So, to start off, maybe you could briefly explain your work to our audience, along with maybe on the lines of what field you're working with, your current research priorities and projects, just for the listeners or audience who may not be too familiar with your work.
Okay. Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. So I work on grassland and savanna ecosystems globally. And by savanna ecosystems, I mean ecosystems that have both trees and grasses in them, right? So at one end, you have grasslands that typically don't have any trees. At the other end, you have forests that typically don't have grasses. And somewhere in between, you have savannas where you have both trees and grasses. So you have these two different life forms that coexist. And typically tends to be a system with a more or less near continuous understory of grasses and where you have the trees sprinkled in them. And it can vary from being fairly open to fairly wooded. And so the work, a lot of our work has centered around trying to understand what actually structures the distribution of savanna ecosystems. Why is it that we find them where we do? And why is it that they don't occur in other places? What determines their structure? So why are some more open, others more closed when it comes to tree cover? Why is it that some support a lot of herbivores while other systems do not? Why is it that some burn more frequently and others do not, and so on? And finally, what actually determines their function? How is it that these different savanna ecosystems sequester carbon? How is it that they cycle water, nutrients, and so on and so forth? And and we're also interested in understanding the impacts of climate change on savanna ecosystems globally. So a lot of our focus in recent years has been in trying to understand how things like changing rainfall or warmer temperatures are likely to influence the distribution of savannas. Are they going to be found in other places now when compared to before? Their structure, are some are going to be more impacted than others? What's going to happen to the herbivores? What's going to happen to fire? And what's going to happen to the functioning and so on? And the idea is if we have all of this information, then we can come up with ways to actually effectively manage these systems because they're fairly widespread. So they occur in about, 40, depending on the estimates, 20 to 40% of the Earth's surface is actually covered by grasslands and savannas, and they support millions of people, right? So they're very important ecosystems globally. And so managing them becomes very important. Yeah. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we kind of do. I can clarify if you have any other questions, but yeah.
So basically, you have been working on on the structure of the ecosystem and how these different factors affect the lives of the different animals and all living in those savannas and grasslands.
Yeah, to some extent,
So,
yes. Yeah.
yeah. So you have done your MSc in computer science at BITS Pilani, and then you moved on to do MS and PhD in zoology and wildlife from the US. So what inspired you to follow this journey from computer science to a path of research in ecosystems and biology?
Well, actually, I was always interested in ecology, nature, conservation, all of that growing up. But growing up, we didn't have, the options to pursue a career in wildlife biology in the country. I think there were very few institutes then. There were slightly more now. But, that option was not really available. So I did an undergraduate degree in computer science. I worked in the industry for 2 years. And then I got the opportunity to actually pursue a master's in the US in zoology and wildlife. And I took it. And even though my master's dissertation was largely computer based, I used simulations to look at, gene flow and extinction dynamics in an endangered species. It allowed me to get a foot in the door. And, from there on, I went and, did a PhD in biology and ecology. And well, here I am. So yeah, so I was always interested in it, but it took me a while to actually, get into the field, so to speak. Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, you say you were always interested in it. What really sparked your interest? What about it really like called to you or made you feel like that's the direction to head in?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know why that interest is, but yeah, I guess the interest itself is innate. And then you manage to read a lot of books about different people working in the wildlife field at that time, including people like Jane Goodall, Cynthia Moss, Diane Fossey, a lot of the early people, right? And so so that kind of helped sort of congeal the interest, so to speak. And yeah,
So, a source of inspiration, perhaps? That's what I understood. Is that what you meant?
lots of people have inspired me, both, many. There's so many ecologists, both past and present, who've been inspirational in many ways. Yeah, I would be loath to just pick a few because then you'll miss out some others who are just as influential. Yeah,
Of
so
course,
many
yeah.
people. Yeah.
So, kind of like bringing things back to the present.
Mhm.
You're working right now, you're researching under as part of NCBS, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
as one of the ecologists and leading ecologists and professors there. So, as part of that, could you describe a recent project from your lab that has maybe potentially can shift our understanding of ecosystem dynamics, something that really could bring a new insight? What is it that you're working on, perhaps?
Oh, fundamentally shifting, paradigm shifting thoughts. Well, that's a bit of a tall order. But I can tell you about some of the work that we've been doing and some of our findings in the past. So one of the questions that we asked early on so we addressed a long-standing debate on whether, savanna ecosystems are actually stable or unstable systems. Because for the longest time, people thought of savannas as being derived anthropogenically. That is, at some point, it used to be a forest, and humans have come and cut it, and that's why we have the savanna ecosystems there. And so they didn't get the attention they deserved because people sort of thought they were these degraded forests. And one of the early lines of research for us was to actually address this question. You mean are savannas actually these degraded ecosystems, or are they, a system in their own right? And so we looked at this question of whether savannas are stable or unstable systems, and our results actually showed that these savannas switch from being stable, climatically determined ecosystems to being unstable, disturbance-driven ecosystems across a gradient of rainfall. So in the drier areas, you tend to have climatically determined savannas. So by that I mean, so if you removed fires, if you removed here grazing, we removed large mammal herbivory, they would still remain as savannas. That is, both trees and grasses would be there in the system. Whereas in the wetter ecosystems, they tend to be disturbance driven. In other words, that if you remove fires or you remove herbivores, they will transition into forests. So in these areas, the existence of a savanna depends on large mammalian herbivores or fires and so on. And so this kind of determines, has implications for how we manage, right? So in the drier areas, people used to spend a lot of money on actually preventing fires and so on and so forth, saying, we need, otherwise it'll get wooded and we lose grazing potential. But these results show that maybe you don't need to spend that much money in the drier areas for fire management, and you focus fire management in the wetter areas, whereas in the drier areas, you focus on herbivores and so on. So that's been, one kind of avenue that we've been pursuing. And more recently, we've also been working on these high elevation forest grassland mosaics. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They call it Shola grassland systems in the Indian context. So if you go in the Western Ghats, up at the really high elevations, and actually even in some lower elevations, you have these very unique biphasic systems where you have both forest patches and then you have embedded in grasslands, right? And they're very unique. They support unique biodiversity, but they tend to be fairly restricted where they occur. And turns out that you find them all over the globe in many places. You find them in Bolivia, you find them in Sri Lanka, you find them in South Africa, and so on. But wherever they occur, they tend to be restricted to these mountain tops and so on. And for a long time, people have been debating actually why is it that these systems exist? Because again, this flies in the face of one of the fundamental tenets of ecology, which is the concept of a climax community. So this is what we get taught in ecology classes in, I don't know, university or high school, maybe, that for a given climate, you have one kind of biome, right? So we know that if it's wet, then you get rainforest. If it's really dry, you should have deserts and so on. But here's a system where under the same climate, you have both forests and grasslands persisting. And again, this was a very enigmatic and intriguing ecosystem. And people again thought that this was largely derived by human activities. But it turns out that that's not the case. A whole bunch of research, both from other groups and us, has shown that these are actually stable and natural ecosystems. And one of the things that we found at these really high elevations is it's frost that keeps these patches, this patchiness maintained, right? We don't know how it came about in the first place, but once these grasslands form, we tend to have frost, which tend to kill the trees. And so the grassland tends to be maintained, but you don't get frost inside the forest. And so, trees are able to establish there. And if that's the case, then with global warming and warmer temperatures, frosts are becoming less frequent. And so these ancient grasslands are likely to be threatened. So we need to think of ways to actually manage these going ahead in the future. Yeah. So yeah, those are some examples that I can think of. Yeah.
So you mentioned like people originally thought that savannas were degraded forests, but upon closer look, you realized that it was not, and it had its own ecosystem that was thriving. In the same way, most conversations around ecosystems and environmental issues or even climate change, they're generally seen through a lens of like doom and gloom. And so since you're an expert in the field, can you like share what aspects of your work give you hope about the future of global ecosystems?
Well, it is kind of a bit unfortunate that, the whole debate around biodiversity conservation and climate change typically tends to come across in a more negative fashion, right? The whole doom and gloom approach. But I do think that there is hope. There's still time to stem some of this flow and stem the tide, so to speak. But the window of opportunity is probably closing. And so we need to act fast. And I think there are a lot of examples, well, maybe not a lot. There are several examples where, of conservation success stories, for example. Recently, the green turtles, have been sort of delisted in the IUCN, not delisted. It's no longer as bad as we thought we were. The Iberian lynx, many other species. Well, so there is hope. There is the possibility of, reversing some of these changes. And I think nature is fairly resilient. And if given the space, it will, it has the capability to actually sort of recover, right? Of course, there are some systems, and they say that once it's gone beyond a certain point, and it's gone, you go across this tipping point, and then systems become a lot harder to recover. We may be getting close to it, but we haven't gone across those. We haven't crossed those thresholds yet. So I think there's still hope. Yeah, we can't give up hope, right? I mean, then it just seems, or it seems more doomsday in that case. Yeah, but yeah, I'm optimistic. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
It's
and you
good
should be too.
to hear that someone is optimistic because in a lot of conversations that are going around right now, especially the younger generation, everyone seems kind of pessimistic that, oh, it's like we're doing things but nothing's happening. That's the kind of narrative to so to hear you put it that way is very encouraging.
I mean, we can't afford to think any other way. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, and because we need to think positively in order to affect that change, I think. So,
Yeah, we need to do something about it and
yeah,
sitting and moping around isn't going to make a difference. Completely
well
agree.
said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot more students and younger people who are actually getting much more interested in this kind of field. Much like what you said, the opportunities to pursue this, study this, understand this is also increasing, especially in India and around the world. So, on that note, I just wanted to know what is your advice to students who are probably keen to contribute or build a career around environmental challenges, ecosystems, or conservation sciences? Like, what kind of skills do they build? What kind of exposure do they get? How do they go about that kind of future?
Well, I would strongly recommend as many people to get into this field as possible because I think there is definitely a need for it. We really need more and more people sort of in the field because it's a global problem and we need global and interdisciplinary solutions, right? So no longer, even if you're talking about biodiversity conservation or climate change or anything like that, the solutions are going to be interdisciplinary. It requires a knowledge of social science. It requires ecology, environment, and so on. So if in terms of advice to for people, younger generation going ahead, in terms of how you sort of prep yourself to be effective in the field, I would strongly say that an interdisciplinary approach is key. You can no longer just be an ecologist or a natural historian. So we need to know, about the social sciences. You need to know about, engineering, maybe, sort of all these different disciplines. So I think to have an open mind and just soak in as much as you can from these different fields because the solutions are going to be interdisciplinary, you know. So that would be my advice. And yeah, I really think there's a lot more people that need to be doing it, and we need, yeah, it's the field is right for creative solutions. That's what we need, right? I mean, we need creative solutions to the problems. Yeah.
So, despite everything, there's still a lot of hope for most of the students here, like to save our planet, basically, in the end.
Yeah.
And there are so many skills that they can possibly build, like you said,
Mhm.
in different fields and different areas. So, to sum all of it up, if there was a message that you could share to the youth of today, to everyone, what would it be?
You mean in terms of just a general message? Well, don't lose. I mean, there is hope. That's the very positive message, and I think it's really this is a kind of, I think we're at a time and where unlike other issues, it's not the older generation educating the younger generation. I think it's the other way. It's the younger generation need to educate the older generation in terms of how we need to proceed, right? I mean, because the older generation is the one that's generated this mess in the first place. And so I think, yeah, if you could just use every opportunity to sort of engage and educate the older generation in terms of the issues, in terms of things that they haven't thought about or they don't stop to think about. I think that would be wonderful. So teach your parents well, I think, is, or the, yeah, relatives, whatever, you know. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting take on how we can really approach this issue. So it's becoming a more common narrative as we go on, is what I feel.
Yeah,
That
it
was,
is. Yeah.
yeah, it is. So a little bit divergent path, but something that you had mentioned earlier. You were talking about thresholds, tipping points, and how we haven't crossed all of them. So I've been reading about this framework called the Planetary Boundaries Framework. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you referring to that by any chance?
Well, I was referring to it, and there was another report that recently came out within the last few days, which I haven't read. I just saw that report that it's come out. Again, even with the tipping, the planetary boundaries, they talk about many of the thresholds being crossed, right?
Yeah.
But it hasn't tipped as yet. So we may be
It's
getting
not
close to
beyond
the
a
tipping
point.
point, but they haven't tipped yet. And they've identified a lot of tipping elements. So there is concern that we need to, try and stop it before anything tips. So yeah. So
So what
that's,
are
yeah,
your
I was
thoughts?
referring to some of that. Yeah.
Right. So, what are your thoughts about? So, there's this framework which scientists and researchers have come together and created, right? And there's like the actions of people, and there's a distance between them. Like, how do you take something, a framework like that, and like make it reach people, make it really change their lifestyles? How do you bridge that gap? Like, how can you take a global issue and localize it? It's something that I've actually been pondering on for a while, and I wanted to hear your take on that.
Well, if you know the answer to that, please let me know. Because
Okay.
yeah, so that's the whole doom and gloom that you were talking about, right? So everybody is talking about these planetary boundaries and, we're going to cross them. And then, all of this, the earth is going to tip into different states and so on. And I mean, it's a hard message to, when you're talking about that scale, everybody is like, oh, what can we do? We're already in that space, right? So I think the trick here is to sort of bring that message that there are these things that are happening that we need to be aware of. It shouldn't become like a deer in a headlight that we're panicking and not doing anything about it, but like let's all do a little bit, little drops of water make the mighty ocean kind of thing. So everybody does their bit, and hopefully these things will be we won't get past that tipping point. But I think it's more a question of sort of making people aware that these are things that we need to be thinking about, and there are little things that we can do. Like most often people don't even stop to think about the little ways that, like, you just walk to the store, for example, if there are, as opposed to just driving for, like, 500 meters or 100 meters and so on. So the little things that you can do can actually make a difference, I think. Yeah, but it's a struggle, right? I mean, if translating that knowledge and these boundaries into action was easy, we would have done it already. So it is a bit of a challenge, but yeah, but hopefully you can tell me the next time we meet what the answer to this would be. Because yeah, there's
I
no,
look
yeah,
forward to that. It would be an interesting conversation if I figure it out the next time we meet.
excellent. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's all the questions we had. And it's been a really amazing conversation. Thank you so much for the time that you spent, for the thought that you put into answering your questions, for the work that you've done, not for us, but like in general. Thank you so much. And we're really grateful to you for giving us this time, for sharing your journey with us. And we hope that whoever listens to this will be as inspired as we are today. Yeah, so I think we can conclude the conversation here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been, yeah, it's been great. And it's wonderful what you guys are doing. I just wanted to say, so keep up the good work. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this journey of ideas, inspiration, and innovation.
We hope this conversation sparked curiosity and reminded you that behind every great discovery is a human story of passion, purpose, and persistence.
Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep learning because the future is being built by the questions you ask today.
This is Dialogues of Discovery, signing off.